85% of all people get really, really nervous right before a presentation. I don't know if that's true, I just made that up. But one thing I do know is that a lot of people get extremely nervous before a presentation, whether they're doing a presentation internally in their business, or they're presenting a report, or they're doing a quarterly business update, whatever it is. And I have done a lot of presentations in my career, and I still do a lot of presentations. I feel like it's all I do. Even if they're like informal presentations where you're just sharing your screen and you're starting to go through a report or something, that in fact is a presentation on its own. But I've learned a lot of stuff. I've learned how to calm my presentation nerves, and that's what this video is all about. As usual, I'm going to talk through a whole bunch of things, and I made a little bit of a framework with some sort of logic around tips to actually calm your presentation nerves. So it's tips for presentation nerves, but it's tips for calming your presenter nerves. I guess I should know my own titles before I start recording a video, but I basically wrote down 3 different categories in 3 different areas. And the 3 different areas, number 1 is, and again, bucket the tips. Number 1 bucket of tips has to do with physical. You want to conquer your physical state. And what your physical state has a lot to do with is how you feel, how you show up, how you come. And a lot of what you're feeling, whether it's nervousness or you got the jitters or whatever it is. The jitters is just a physical reaction to what you're experiencing mentally up here. I'm not a psychotherapist or anything like that, but these are things that I've actually witnessed on my own, and how you can actually calm those things down. So that's number 1. Number 2 is your spiritual and your mental. So very much tied to conquering the physical, and we'll get into what that means. And lastly, technical preparation is another category. If you are really, really nervous, it could just be a sign that you're not prepared for whatever your presentation is. Maybe you have no idea what the hell you're talking about, and if you don't actually start with the technical preparation, then you're never going to be successful at your presentation. It's just not going to work for you, and you're probably going to end up falling on your face. So here I am with another video, and I want to start. Look, so when you're thinking about the physical state and the spiritual and mental state, these two are really closely tied together, right? So they're so closely tied together that I'm actually going to draw a person, and we're going to start with the physical. And the person is going to be a representation of this concept that I'm talking about. So let's start by drawing a blank face, if you can see my face. And I chose the marker brown, maybe because that's like me. So I can draw someone who's very similar to me. The ears would be bigger if it was me, and there wouldn't be hair, although I used to have hair many, many moons ago. But when you think about your physical state, conquering the physical, let me take a step back. Conquering the physical basically means your physical state. So that's number 1, is your physical state. And how can you control your physical state? And that's the main word there, is how do you control your physical state? And this is things like, if you're a follower of Tony Robbins and you've ever seen his content, he's big on priming rituals. And priming rituals is just another form of, you can say affirmations, you can tell yourself that you're awesome, you can work out. One thing for me is that how I feel physically obviously has a lot to do with what I did the day before and what I did the morning of my presentation. So when I'm doing a presentation or even a big meeting, I want to make sure that I've worked out. I love to work out. I've made it a part of my routine. 5 o'clock in the morning is when I wake up. Don't think everybody wakes up at 5 a.m. Probably just a small cohort of people. But I really recommend, I've always been a morning person, even as a kid. So waking up early and really taking care of my physical wellness is important. I'll go crush 700 calorie workout and do that at least 5, sometimes 6 days a week. And when you have a strong physical state, your cognitive function is really, really high. You're able to remember things. And why does cognitive function matter? It matters because it can help you remember things. And if your state and your energy is really, really in a good place and really, really high, you are less likely to have overall nerves, right? So working out, that's one of the things that you can do. Now, when you think about that physical state, there's other elements to this, even during a presentation, is you want to smile, right? Like, look at that smile. Look at those buck teeth. But that was me, and still kind of me. But when you smile, that's a big part of your physical presence. When you smile, that transfer of energy actually goes to your whole body. So a couple of the things that I would do: smile, laugh, and even if you have nothing to really laugh about, let's say you're super nervous, and it's kind of counterintuitive to go, I'm just going to start laughing up a storm. But for me, smiling and laughing is super, super important. If you force yourself to do it, you're actually going to transfer that energy to your whole body. You're going to feel like you are actually happy and maybe not as nervous, right? And then smiling actually can be a form of gratitude, like you smiling and being grateful for the moment that you're in. But you know what? I'm just going to erase that here, because that's where we make the connection to spiritual and mental, right? If you think about your gratitude, and what I mean by that in an example of, okay, you're in a senior position at work, you got to deliver a big presentation, or you're, like I said, non-sales, and you got to deliver a big presentation. You don't really have those sales skills. You don't have the persuasion and stuff like that. Being grateful for where you are and being grateful for the opportunity is something that gets overlooked. You got to have a natural gratitude for the situation that you're in. Even if it's a difficult presentation and you think all hell's going to break loose, or shit's gonna hit the fan if you don't do well, you should always be grateful. So if you have gratitude, and that's where I make the connection between being grateful and smiling and being happy, right? Being happy is so important to your overall physical well-being, as well as your spiritual and mental health, right? And when you think about your mental health also, is you want to be kind to yourself. You want to be kind to yourself. Now, I have this thing where I'm generally kind to myself, but I'm hard on myself at the same time. And that's kind of a contradiction. How can you be hard on yourself and how can you be kind to yourself at the same time? Well, I know when I need to be easy on myself. I know when there's things that were outside of my control in that presentation that I just couldn't control. Let's say I had a tough person in the audience. Let's say I had an executive join one of the meetings, and that person, for whatever reason, didn't like the initiative or didn't like my presentation. Then I just leave it at that. I'm kind to myself, right? But I'm hard on myself in the sense that I won't accept myself to not make the best effort. I will make 100% the best effort possible. And it has a lot to do with your mental well-being as well, because if you think about sort of committing to excellence, a lot of that has to do with your mental ability to do so. And you being happy with yourself can do wonders when you're here, right? I want to go back to conquering the physical really quickly because, and I know I'm just talking all over the place, and that's probably what this channel is for, so you can listen to me ramble. But when you think about the physical as well and conquering the physical, one of the things that I like to do is a do-re-mi exercise. And I'm not a singer, I'm no Mariah Carey, but sometimes you want to be able to hit the high notes. If you're presenting and you're speaking a lot, you got to actually prime your voice and prime the way that you're speaking, because you can get into a situation where you're a little bit monotone. And again, a monotone voice will typically come from a monotone person and a monotone frame and a monotone body. So that's why it has a lot to do with being physical. So going back to it, how you control your voice and what you do to prime your voice is super important. Your voice will actually come out better if you have a good posture, right? So if you've got a good posture, your voice is going to be better. So you got to have your shoulders out, your chest high, or your shoulders back, your chest out, and you can actually deliver a really good presentation and just command the room and command the attention. So if you control this a little bit, you're probably going to shake some of those nerves, because that's what we're talking about. Back to spiritual and mental again. Gratitude, being kind to yourself while hard on yourself, is a bit of an oxymoron. Yourself, F. And it is a bit of an oxymoron, but that's the interesting thing about all this, is that being hard on yourself but being kind to yourself is the duality that sort of lives together. I mean, there's all types of dualities around you if you're looking around and you're paying a lot of attention, right? Now, lastly, I want to talk about technical preparation, right? And hopefully all of this makes sense and you guys are gathering tips from this, right? And the reason why I drew this guy, so I can also focus on some of the other things too, right? And before we get to technical preparation, actually, when you think about someone's ability to be enthusiastic, right? Enthusiasm comes from the face and the eyes and the eyebrows sometimes. And your ability to listen. So let's say you're delivering a presentation and you're so nervous that you're not listening to anybody around you. Well, the priming stuff will help you with that, right? So that you can get into a good physical state. When you're in a good physical state, you should be able to react really quickly, and you should be able to listen to people, and you should listen for all the cues around you, because there is feedback coming from all over the room when you're delivering a presentation. You can have people in the audience, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, you can have people in the audience that are indicating something to you and giving you feedback without actually saying something direct. For instance, the easiest example is when you have somebody yawning during your presentation. What's that telling you? It could tell you that you're a little boring. Also, if they're saying anything during your presentation, maybe you don't have them engaged enough. So you got to listen. And as we build out this guy, me right here, me with hair, a lot of it has to do with physical. I'll draw a little mustache here. Oh yeah, nice mustache. And maybe a goatee and a beard. Super cool. But this is a guy who's ready to actually conquer a presentation. Now, he's happy, so you'd think he's technically prepared. And like I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter how all this other stuff really goes unless you're technically prepared for your presentation. So if you're brought in as like a subject matter expert, or you're presenting something that's an area of your job that you should know technically, you better make sure you are technically prepared. If you've got no technical preparation, then that's a problem. And one of the things that you can do, aside from understanding and knowing your content, so that's number one, is know your content. But one of the things you need to do is you need to practice. So I've been in situations where I felt like I don't need to practice. Like, I know this stuff. I know this really well. Nobody knows this better than me. But that's confidence, right? And typically people who are overconfident, they might not have as many presentation nerves. So this is for you. If you're not a super confident person, you may be someone who's naturally more nervous, or maybe you're more introverted. And don't get me wrong, introversion and nervousness, there's no positive correlation between the two. What I mean is, like, you can be an introvert and be not nervous ever. You could just be an introvert and you don't like to be out there too much. But basically, typically, if you are more of an introverted person, sometimes you may actually have more nerves. And practicing is the best way to get around it. So practicing your content is one of the most important things that you can do, because you need to know what you're talking about. So the rehearsal used to be like corny to me, right? Like, if you were rehearsing something, sometimes I wouldn't even rehearse things. I'd be like, yeah, I know my stuff, I know my slides, I know my material, I know what I'm doing. But you should always be rehearsing. That doesn't even, like, we're talking about from the context of an internal presentation at work, but it could even be for an interview or something. I really, really, really realize that you should be practicing your material and practicing your content, because practice makes perfect. Also, as far as technical presentation, review your deck. There are many times where I've seen people that do not review their deck and they don't know what slide is coming next. So they may know all their content in fragmented bits and pieces, but they actually don't know the flow of it. When you're doing a presentation, the story and the flow matters so much. You're like telling a story every time you get up and you speak about even 4 or 5 slides. It's the story that you're telling. And the rhythm and the fluidity at which you tell that story is gonna keep people engaged and have people hooked, right? And then the last thing is practicing your actual tools and tech. And what I mean by that is, if you're on Teams, Microsoft, Google, whatever, if you're using an application that you're not used to, even if you're used to it, or your computer, like, make sure everything works. Make sure you practice with everything, and make sure that you're able to actually practice the presentation and run through like a dry run, and make sure you're able to master that, so you don't have any technical glitches. The technical glitch will actually ruin your ability to give a thoughtful presentation. So anyways, those are my tips. Like, number 1, conquer the physical. Number 2, spiritual and mental. Number 3, technical presentation, or preparation rather. And if you can master all those things, then you can be in a pretty good position to win. And that's all it is. You do a lot of practice, and your first presentation is going to go well. The second time you need to get up in front of an audience, whether it's the same audience or a completely different audience, you're probably going to do really, really well. It's like, it takes a lot of time and sometimes a lot of cycles of going through this, but knowing that you can actually be in control could put you really in the driver's seat and be happy like this guy right here with the buck teeth.